Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shir.
Shalom Aleichem and welcome back to today's Daf Hayomi Nazir Samach Dalet. We are holding on Samach Gimel Amud Beis at the fourth line from the bottom of the Amud. Keitzad Yored. In the Mishnah we learned about a fellow who went to be tovel in a mikveh and discovers a mace floating on the water. We say perhaps he touched it and therefore it's a Safek Tumah in a Rishus HaYachid and he's Tamei. Now, we're meant to know that if a person actually encountered the Tumah, he touched it, of course he's Tamei, irrespective of the position of the Tumah, whether it's grounded or whether it's floating. Touched it, he touched it. But let's say there's a Safek. There's an uncertainty. Did I touch, did I not touch? Did I lean over the mace or not? Says the Gemara Chiddush. It depends. If it's grounded, if it's positioned, it's stationary, then a Safek Tumah is Tamei. But if it's not grounded, if it's Tsafa, if it's floating on water, so when it comes to Tumas mace, doesn't matter. Safek Tumah in the Rishus HaYachid is Tamei. But if it's Tsafa and it's a Sheret, which is Metame through direct contact, through Maga, Eina, Metama, Lenin Sheret, it's not Metame. So again, if there was a Vadai encounter, of course you're Tamei. But if you're not sure whether you touched it, if it's a Sheret, it depends. If it's on the ground, Safek Tumah in Rishus HaYachid is Tamei. But if it's floating, it's not really grounded, then the Safek is not Tamei. How do we know this? This not. We have a Mishnah. Safek Tumah Tsafa. There is a Safek involving a Tumah which was floating. Ben Mekalim, Ben Mekarka, whether it was floating in a receptacle or on the ground, floating on the water, on in-ground water. Tahira, we don't apply the halacha of Safek Tumah Rishus HaYachid Tamei. That's the halacha. We're going to see it from a pasuk. Rabbi Shimon Omer, it depends. Bekalim Tmeya, if it's floating in a kli, that's considered grounded and stationary. So even though it's technically floating around, but it's inside the kli, its position is in the kli, and it's considered grounded. Bekarka, it's floating on in-ground water, Tehira. Then we say the suffix involving that interaction is Torah. My time at Tanakama, why does the Tanakama differentiate between standing and floating? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abudimi, Ksiva, the pasuk says, "B'chol asheretz hasheretz." If a person touches any sheretz, right? So he's tamei. Kol makim shu sheretz, which sounds like anywhere. Uksiv al aretz. Then it says no, only if it's on the aretz. Okay, so what's the answer to this apparent contradiction? Vadai magoy. If there was a vadai contact, then you're tamei, irrespective of where the sheretz is, on the ground or floating on water, doesn't matter. But Safek Magoy, if there's a Safek, whether he touched or not, then if it's floating, it's Tahar. Rabbi Shimon, my time. Why does Rabbi Shimon say, well, if it's floating in a kli, it's still considered stationary? If it's floating on a body of in-ground water, it's not. Why does he differentiate between kli and karka? Amar uluk siv ach mayin aboir. Pasuk says body of water is tar, and then it says uksiv yitma. The end of the pasuk says yitma. So what is it? Is water tar or not? So the answer was speaking about something floating on the water. Hakeitzad safa bekalim. If it's floating on water which is in a kli, we ignore the fact that it's floating. Tamei, we treat it like any other tumah. Any Safek tumah in this case is tamei, but bekarka tar. If it's floating on a body of water which is on the karka, then it is tar. Again, provided we're speaking about a suffix. So bottom line is, pertaining to tumas maga of a sheretz, vadai naga, of course you're tamei. Suffix in Rishus HaYachid, it depends. If it's munach, if it's positioned on something, if it's stationary, it's grounded, Safek Tumah is tamei. If it's floating around, Safek Tumah is tar. Rabbi Shimon says, floating on the garka, floating on the kli. So floating on mayim, which is in the kli, is considered like munach and not like floating. Tana Rabban, we learned in Brisa, where we elaborate a bit further on this halach. Although we speak about tumah tsafa, floating tumah, not having the same value as a regular tumah, but you should know that kol hanitalim v'anigrorin sveikan tameh. Suppose you're standing in a body of water, and there's a tumah nearby, and a person's like leading it. He's holding a string, and it's hanging from that string. That's nitalim. The person's sort of controlling this tumah, which is now floating on the water, but it's being held by somebody, controlled by somebody. V'anigrorin, always dragging across the water. So, although it would appear that the thing is floating, it does not have a din of tumah tzafa. So, although it's floating, but since it's a person controlling it by way of a string, it's hanging or dragging by a string, then we say it's landed. It's like sitting with the person. The person's on the ground. It's stationary. It's grounded. It's not considered like it's floating. Sveikan tami v'pnei shehin kimunachim, we treat it as though it's stationary. And it's on the other hand, if it's being tossed through the air, even if it's not floating but it's flying, it's not grounded. In that case, we say sveikan tar. This only applies to something which is metami b'maga, but something which has a more advanced type of tumah, like a kazayis of mace, which is metami b'oil. In that case, it doesn't matter. Position is irrelevant. Even if it's floating, it creates like an environment around it. Doesn't matter if it's sitting or it's floating or it's flying. Chutz min kazayis min ameis va'ma'il al pnei tumah. Two examples of tumas oil. The first case is where the kazayis of the mace is sort of floating on the water, or in the second case, mal al pnei tumah, the kazayis is on the ground and he hovered above it. He's floating, and there's a suffix of whether, he did tumas oil. In this case we say suffix, but shesayachid is tummy. So even though there's floating going on, doesn't matter. Oil doesn't have that same kula as maga. And also v'chodav shematami milamala kilamata. Anything which is matami, above and below, meaning it's not by way of transmission through maga. Lasuya zav v'zava, a zav or a zava are matami, even if there's no direct contact. Let's say a zav is lying on a mattress which is actually above 10 other mattresses. The bottom one is serving him as well, even though there was no direct contact between the zav and the mattress and the bottom. Same thing with layers on top of him. So he's matame his own environment, in which case we don't care whether he's standing or floating or moving. It all relates to him and has the same level of tumah. Here comes an interesting shaila. Boy Rami Bar Chama. What if you have a kazayis of a mace, b'kli, inside a kli, b'kli tzafal pnei hamayim, and the kli is floating on the water. So the kli is moving around, but the kazayis is pretty comfortable in there. Mao, how do you treat this tumah? Basar kli azlinan? Actually, some change it to sheretz, because we just said a mace is matami anyways. So you have a sheretz in a kli, and the kli is floating. Basar kli azlinan. Do you focus on the receptacle, on the kli, on the vessel, and the sheretz is grounded in there? So there's no tumah tzafa. It's grounded. Oy basar maya azlinan. Or do we focus on the water? Meaning, ultimately, everything is floating on the water. So it's tumah tzafa. Now, if you propose that we look at the kli, meaning, forget about the water. The sheretz in the kli is quite comfortable, is stationary, is grounded, so it's metame. What about the next case? Meis al gabe sheretz, mao. You have a kazayis they changed the gersa. You have a sheretz, which is sort of piggybacking on a kazayis of mace. And that kazayis of the mace is floating on water. Mao. What happens in this case? So the sheretz is not in a kli, it's just sitting on a kazayis of a mace, which is on the water floating. Mao. Kivan dai tumas erev, by tumas shiva, shall we say? These two tumas are so disalike the sheretz is just a metame person, for one day, tumas erev, until evening. The mace is metame person for 7 days. It's totally different, serving a totally different function, different purpose, different nature. And therefore, keman de machsa tumah b'klidamya. We'll look at the sheretz as though it's sitting in a kli, because they're two separate entities. So the sheretz is sort of positioned on something else, which is like a kli, and it's stationary on that thing, despite the fact that that thing is now floating on water. Because the sheretz, which we're focusing on, is comfortable, it's positioned, is in a stationary mode in that sort of kli. Or shall we say, no, it's all one big entity floating on the water. Tumah smichti, it's like one big thick tumah, despite the differences between the two tumas. So everything is floating on water, and it's called tumah tzafa. Okay, let's suggest that perhaps we look at the bottom tumah as a kli, holding the top one, which is now stationary, a non-floating entity. What about the next case? So you have a vitami vade, and therefore it's not floating and it's metami vade. What about sheretz agabi nevela? Sheretz piggybacking on a piece of nevela. The nevela tzafa, the nevela is floating on water. Now, what's in this case? Given the tarvayu tumas erev inun, shall we say, in contrast to the previous case that we're speaking about different types of tumas, so one can be considered a kli to the other. Here, both sheretz and nevela metami the same way. One who interacts with these will be tummy just for one day. So they're so similar and so alike. Tavayu tumas erev inun. So tumas michti, perhaps in this case we should certainly consider it one entity, and it's all floating on water. Or we can say haikazais, haikadasha. There's a difference in terms of the halacha. How much of the nevela is needed to be metami? You need a kazais of nevela to be metami. How much of sheretz is needed? Just kadasha, the size of a lentil. And therefore, we'll treat them differently. It's like two entities, one sitting on the other, in which case the top entity is sort of positioned on the bottom entity, is considered to be in a stationary position and not floating. Okay, so we're not sure. What about the next case? Sheretz al gabi sheretz mao. Right? So even if in the previous case we'll say, well, two different entities, one serves as a base, the lower serves as a base for the upper. What about a double sheretz? Sheretz al gabi sheretz mao. Hani vade chat shiur ninu. In this case, certainly, there's no reason to differentiate. This is the sheretz, that's the sheretz. They both have the same shear, so it's all floating on the water. Or you can say, kiva the mafski madadi, since they're ultimately separate beings, separate items. We'll consider the top as though he's positioned on the bottom and not floating on the water. Now, if you'll tell me that in this case of the double sheretz, give it the miskim adadi, since they're separate entities, command the mancha b'klidami, that allows us to view the top one as though it's sitting in a kli and not floating on water. What about sheretz agabi nevela? Sheni meichemau. You have a sheretz sitting on liquefied nevela. What would you say in this case? So you have a sheretz which is now positioned on liquefied nevela, which is floating on water. Kibud and a meicha, since the nevela is somewhat liquefied, it changes status. Havale mashk, it's like liquid. And now the upper item, the sheretz, is considered floating on water because the nevela doesn't provide any barrier. It's like one body of water all the way up to the sheretz. Or we can say, fact is, nevela it was, or still is, considered somewhat food, even though it's been sort of gelled and liquefied, and therefore it can provide that separation to allow us to view these sheretz on top of it as though it's sitting on the nevela, not on the water. If you consider that to be true, what about sheretz on top of shichva zera? Sheretz agabi shichva zera mao. Perhaps the shichva zera certainly is considered like mashke, because it was mashke to begin with. And therefore there's no barrier between the upper item and the water. Now if you'll tell me that even by shichva zera, given the misakra, since it comes from a person, we don't treat it as mashke. It's more of has a different status, and therefore it can provide that separation between the sheretz and the water beneath it. So what about sheretz agabe mechatas mao? You have a sheretz floating on paraduma water, which is water mixed in with ashes, a thicker type of consistency. Umechantas safan al gabi mayim, and the mechatas is on the actual water. Mao, do you treat the sheretz above the mechatas as separate from the water, as though it's positioned on the mechatas, or since ultimately it's all water, sheretz is on the water itself and floating and has that kula of tumat safa liyadina? We're not sure about all these cases. Take it, we'll leave it unresolved. So bottom line is like this: a person interacted with tumah, vadai, of course he's tamei. Safek, shus hayachid, is tamei. So if it involves mace or zav, doesn't matter where the mace or zav is, if it's floating, station, tamei. But by sheretz, tamei b'maga, needs to be positioned, needs to be grounded, has to have that mucking to relate to the shus hayachid, and then we say safek would be tamei. But if it's floating on water, doesn't have that din. Shimon says, floating in a kli, which is in Rosh Hashanah, is considered kimunochin. We have another chiddush that even though the tumah is floating, but if a person's handling it, and that person's obviously, positioned on firm ground, then we say, then we say that it's considered like munachas, and does not have the kula of tumah tzaf. Okay, continues the Gemara. Amar Rav Hamnuna. Let's go back to the Mishnah. We learned that a person encountered a tumas hatohim, a concealed tumah. He's not sure whether he actually touched it, although typically suffix tumah in Rosh Hashanah is tamei, but if it was a tumas hatohim, halacha al Masina dictates to us that he's considered tar, provided he had a cheskas tahara. He was tar on the tar track, and then he encountered this suffix. But suppose he was tummy and he was trying to get himself clear of that tumah. He went to the mikveh to be toivel from that tumah, and it turns out there was a suffix tumas hatohim in that mikveh. We say, well, cheskas tummy remains tummy. That's the halacha in the Mishnah back in Av Samach Gimel. Amar Rav Hamnuna, Nazir v'osei Pesach shalchu b'kivar hatohim b'shvi shelahen tahir. So here we have a Nazir. He was certainly tummy. Okay, he became tummy. Tumas meis. He waited 7 days. On the third, hazo aspara. On the seventh, hazo aspara. He was toivel. He was megaleach here like a Nazir tummy. And before nightfall, before he had the completion of his tahara, the hair of shemesh, it was discovered today that on that day, on day 7, he encountered a tumas hatohim. It was a suffix whether he became tummy with a concealed tumah. He didn't know that at the time. He didn't know that, right? So he proceeded with his nazir tahara. He started again, 30 days, shaved, and now he discovers, wow, way back on day 7 of that tumah, I encountered a tumas hatohim. I'm not sure whether I touched that tumah which was tahim. Says Rav Hamnuna, he's okay, he's tar. Same thing with the Osei Pesach. A fellow became tummy. He waited 7 days. He was toivel. Before Erev Shemesh, he went ahead and did the. Before Erev Shemesh, he encountered a suffix tumas hatohim. He didn't know better at that time. Then he went and did the Korban Pesach. And now after he brings the Korban Pesach, it was discovered that, back on day 7, before Erev Shemesh, he had that possible encounter with the tumas hatohim. Says Rav Hamnuna, Nazir v'osei Pesach shalchu b'kivar hatohim b'shvi shalem tahim. They're okay. Why? Because they already had a tahara. They were b'cheskas tahara. They were pretty much more or less complete with their tahara process. And now they're already, after the Nazirus and after the Korban Pesach, the halacha is, if it was discovered at this point that there was a tumas hatohim encounter, they're tar. Tar, my time, why delay alima? Tumas hatohim lemistar. Tumas hatohim has no power to destroy, to cancel the Nazirus and the Korban Pesach. Masav Rav Avakasha. Yorad tar mitumas hameis tamei. The Mishnah tells us. If the fellow was tamei, and then he went to be toivel, and then he encountered a tumas hatohim, we say he remains tamei shecheskas tamei tamei. The person was presumed to be tamei, sticks to tumah. Cheskas tar. These fellows were certainly tamei. So when they encountered the tumas hatohim, we should say cheskas tamei tamei. Amar Leser Rav Hamnuna tells him, look, Of course, I would agree to you. Suppose the Nazir discovers today that on that day, day 7, when he became Tameh, he was still before his haircut. Of course, I agree with you that Cheskas Tameh. I'm not speaking about that type of case. I'm speaking that on day 7 he was, Toivel, had his Tiglachas, was done, everything he needed to do for his purification process. And then he had the issue of Tumas HaTayim. Amalei Rava. You know what? I would also agree with you. Pesach, in the case of the fellow trying to do the carbon Pesach. So again, he was tummy, waited 7 days, was Toivel. And then he went and did the carbon Pesach, and it was discovered that on that day that he was Toivel, he had a Tumas HaTayim. I agree with you that he's okay. He's not missing anything. Once he was Toivel, he's already tar. In that case, we say, even though there was a Tumas HaTayim, Cheskas tar is presumed to remain tar. So basically, they clarify their positions. We're speaking about people who did everything in their hands, everything in their ability to become tar, and then they encounter Tumas HaTayim. We say Cheskas tar remains tar. Amalei Abai, what about one thing we're missing? Herav Shemesh. So even though they were Toivel, and even though the Nazir already shaved the Tiglachas HaTumah, V'amuchusar Herav Shemesh has Abai. Amalei Abai, we're missing one thing, the Herav Shemesh, Amuchusar Herav Shemesh. That's not a complete Tahara until you're done the Herav Shemesh. Amalei or Amrilei, they told him, or Amnuna told him, Herav Shemesh, that's not something that you have to do, that's natural. It's a naturally occurring phenomenon. Shimsha, Larva, the Shimsha sets on its own. It's not something required of the Nazir or the Eisei Pesach. That's not called Chisoren in Tahara. I do whatever I need to do to become Tar. That is sufficient to give me the Cheskas Tar. And you should know, even Abai himself reverted, conceded, agreed that lack of Herav Shemesh is not held against you. The Sanya, we have a brisa discussing an entirely different topic. Yoim Malois Tavi. Taich Malois Loi Tavi. We speak about an Isha who gave birth. She had an Akeva, and the Mei Tahara lasts until 80 days, after which she brings a carbon on day 81, right? Let's say she had another baby, miscarried within the 80. So if it's Taich Malois within the 80, either day 80 or before day 80, so she's not yet ready for the carbon. So anything that happens within that period is sort of included in the first birth experience and does not require a new carbon. It's covered by the same carbon. So Yom Melois, if it's on the finished day 80, Tosfos says it means really day 81. When she's done her count, it's a new Leda, a new experience, Tavi, a new carbon is required. But Taich Melois, if it's still within the 80, it's included in the first Leda experience, covered by the same umbrella. Like Tavi, there's no need for a new carbon. What about if she had another experience later? Gave birth today. Miscarried on day 60 of that first birth. Miscarried on day 60 of that second birth. So she never really had the opportunity to bring a carbon on the first birth. Right? Everything happened within, successfully. It's all like a chain. So, Leda number 3 occurred within the Yom Meloisa Leda number 2, which occurred within the Meloisa Leda number 1. What happens there? Yachalei Tavi, Aleda Shefalei Fnei Melois. So we understand, perhaps, she doesn't bring a new carbon for the Leda which occurred within the Melois of the first experience. But what happens if this happens again? Avatavi Aleda, but perhaps she brings a new carbon for the third experience. Shala'achar Melois. Avatavi Aleda Shala'achar Melois. What about bringing a carbon for the third Leda, which although occurred within the 80-day count of the second Leda, but beyond the 80 days of the first Leda? Some take out the next words of the Tipat Mishneh. Tamar Loimar, with a pasuk, it's all included, one for all. Ubamloisim Tahara, which tells us Biyay Melois Tavi. She gave birth after Melois, it's a new slate. Taich Melois, within the Melois, Loi Tavi, there's no need for a new carbon. Question, what do you mean? The third experience is way past 80 of the first experience. Right? Remember, today was one Leda, in 60 days another Leda, and then 60 days later another Leda. Why do we include the third Leda into the first carbon? Amr Afkana, you know why? Shani Yacha, the reason is Shemachasra carbon, because you never got to the point of carbon on the first Leda. It was cut short by that second Leda, which was cut short by the third Leda. So she never got to the point of Chiyuv Korban on the first Leda. So we're waiting. It's sort of pending, hovering. And that will ultimately cover all the experiences. That explains this halacha. Question remains. Let's go back to the first case. Leda today, and then the next miscarriage happened on day 81. We say, well, you're done with the first birth. It's a new experience. Why? Because you're totally tahar on day 81. Asks the Gemara, totally tahar? Let's say she was tovel only on day 81. She's waiting for Erev Shemesh. She wasn't fully tahar yet until nightfall. Why is that a new experience? It's still included. She can't yet bring her korban until Erev Shemesh. Samnami, even in the first case, Machasra, Erev Shemesh, she's missing the very important component called Erev Shemesh to complete her purification process. So again, we're speaking that she gave birth today, and then on day 81, past Malays, after she was tovel, she gave birth again, but it was still prior to Erev Shemesh. She was not yet fit to bring a korban on the first experience. So why do we separate the experiences? It's still under the same umbrella. Amalei Abaye, Shim Shem Mela Arva. Don't worry about Erev Shemesh. That's not something within your ability to do. She's done everything she needed to do. As far as she's concerned, she finished her tahara, and therefore we begin a new slate. So clearly, Abaye subscribes to this idea, and likewise in our story of the Tumas al-Tahim, he'll agree as well. Okay, let's summarize today's daf. A Vadai Tumah, of course, is Matame. A Safek Tumah, Birshus Arabim is Torah, Birshus Ayachid is Tameh. So when it comes to Tumas Oil or Tumas Zav, Hesed, and all that, doesn't matter where the Tumah is or how it's positioned. But Tumas Maga, like a Sheretz, needs to be positioned on something stationary. It needs to relate to the Makam, to the Birshus Ayachid, to be considered Safek Tumah, Birshus Ayachid, which is Tameh. If it's floating on water, untethered, not held on, not being dragged by a person or being led by a person, then that tumah is considered tumah tzafa, and the suffix is not tamei. Reb Shimon says if it's in a kli, it doesn't matter. It's considered like it's munach. We had several examples of all kinds of sveikus in this regard. You have the tumah sitting in a kli. The kli is on the water, or kli is sitting on this and that. Everything's on the water, but there's some sort of separation. We separate. We do consider the sheretz to be on water. We leave it teku. Tumas hatoim, a concealed tumah has leniency. So when it comes to a Nazir or a oisei pesach, if they encounter this tumas hatoim, even, I just want to stress, even if there was a vadai tumah in the kever hatoim, it turns out that they really interacted with the tumah, then they're still tahar because it was a kever time, provided they had a cheskas tahara. But if they had a cheskas tumah, it doesn't work. And Rav Nuna tells us, even if there was some sort of tvila and teglachas, but there was not yet head of shemesh, that's enough to be considered cheskas tahara. He did everything that he meant to do, first tahara. At that point, he has a cheskas tahara, and therefore, even though he encountered a tumas hatoim, we say cheskas tahar is tahar. Although Abaye initially challenged it, turns out Abaye was maskim, he agrees. Head of Shemesh is not a personal component, it's not something which you're meant to do, it's not part of your effort, and therefore, even without Head of Shemesh, Tvilo, in the case of the Nazir, Tvila and Teglachas, that is sufficient to put you on a Torah track, and we say Cheskas Torah is Torah. All the best to you, and Hatzlacha Rabbah.